the first grandchild, and it was a girl, so I got her name.
Nice.
Hello.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Sam. Hi, Ann. Gary.
How are you, Chris?
Peter.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I haven't seen or talked to you since your trips. A
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of stories.
lot of stuff going on. I'm sure I'll hear him one of these days.
Yeah, a lot of stories. So I'm gonna give it a few more minutes. I know it's almost 7 o'clock, but I was thinking there was gonna be quite a few more people.
Yeah, I hadn't heard, I had not talked with any myself, but
Wow, I talked to Norma yesterday, and I thought she would be coming.
okay.
And then I think that Cheryl and Barb Miller, and seems like I had a lot of folks respond they would be on Zoom. So
Doing well, that's,
Well, they got a minute yet, Chris.
yeah. Well, my clock says 7 o'clock, so we better just leave them in the dust. Go ahead and get started. I'm just kidding. I'll give them 5 minutes. So let's see.
Did you have an okay turnout Tuesday at church?
We had 5 on Tuesday in person. So
Okay.
maybe, but you know what? It's also the summertime, so I didn't
Absolutely.
see any way of doing all of Genesis in the fall in 16 weeks. So, I suppose I could have done it in the fall and run into the spring, but I know people were wanting to start Bible study sooner rather than later. So
Yeah, I personally, based on Disciple, I guess I thought, how are we going to need that much time to cover Genesis between now and December? So that was my concern, but
yeah, that's 50 chapters. It's quite the book. So
right,
yeah. Well, hi, Jean.
Hi, Chris. How are you? How's everybody doing?
Doing
Good,
well.
hi.
How are you?
Good. Of course, the guy that mows my yard is going to be in the backyard here in just about 60 seconds as soon as we get started. So I'm going to have to shut the door.
well, you
Okay.
can invite him to join us, Gene.
I know I ought to.
I think we've all been there. We've all had things like that happen.
No, it's me and my next door neighbor. I swear, as soon as I mow my yard, now tomorrow she's going to go out and mow hers. So it's about this much shorter than mine, and it makes me look bad, so then I'm gonna have to mow mine, and it never ends.
Well, Jean, I have not mowed mine since the day before I left on mission trip. So
Oh, I don't feel so bad then.
tomorrow's the day. I've been running since I got back. So
You're gonna have to bail yours.
You're liable to have to bail it, Chris.
Yep.
I'll have to bail it.
Yeah.
You need to get a
Not that
goat.
bad.
Get a goat.
Yeah, there you go. Get a goat.
Mhm.
Hi, Tom.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. How are you guys?
Hi,
Good.
Tom.
Well,
Hi.
how's your dad?
Yeah, it's hard. My dad is at First Community Village in rehab, and he'll be moving next week into the memory care.
Oh, you will. Oh,
Yeah. I'm not sure if he knows that or not. He knows he's going somewhere else, but today my mom and Heather, my wife, moved stuff out of my parents' house to get his room ready. So his room's ready and decorated. They just don't like to move people late in the week because they don't want weekend staff to be the first people they see. They want Monday through Thursday or Friday staff
I see.
since they're there more often. So
Hear that?
we'll see how that goes. It's
Cheryl's moving.
confusing for him, and it's
Tough.
rough for my mom because she wants to be able to take care of him at home, but it's just she can't. So
Oh.
that's where they are. It's just
He'll
it's
wear,
sorry, what?
no, being a caregiver, she will be the one that gets worn out before he does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she has some health issues that are kind of under control, but she has some nerve damage. And she tried like a spinal stimulator about a month ago, implant, and it didn't work. So she's back on her medication, which is keeping it at bay mostly. So that's good, but stress certainly exacerbates,
Sure.
makes it worse. So I think when we get through this, over this hump next week, and she can start looking at what the new normal looks like, things might be a little calmer.
Great.
Is that something that we could add to the prayer chain?
Maybe just generally that he's at First Community. But yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
Not the memory stuff.
Okay,
I think
Yeah,
that
we
my mom wouldn't like that. Yeah.
sure.
Right.
Yeah,
First Community will be good.
Over there at the, where you want me to do it.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Turn the light on over there. Put the button.
Hi, Jane.
Hi there. Good to
Jane.
see everybody.
You too.
Roger's munching on his hamburger, so he's right here though.
Hey, Chris.
Norma, here comes Norma.
There's
Hi, Roger.
So good to see you all. I just get excited thinking about it. Now I can see you and I'm really, truly blessed.
Hey, point.
Man,
Last showed up at choir, and guess what?
what?
Life is normal.
Felt good, he says.
I tell you what, I give thanks for vaccines because I feel like I can go around and breathe normally and
We still
all
have
that
to wear
good stuff.
masks at work. Isn't that something? I think we're the only place in Ohio that has to wear a mask
Oh,
still.
no, it's still happening.
Is it?
Yeah. Just depends on where you are.
yeah. Hi, Molly.
Molly,
Where's Molly?
Got to-
There she
Yeah,
is. Hi,
there she
Go
is.
nowhere but to bars.
Yeah.
Molly
must be
needs
on
She's
mute.
getting her speakers probably. There we go. Connect
And
to
Arnold's
audio.
up.
There we go. Hi, Molly. Great, you can hear us. That's wonderful. Okay. Well, we're just I just kind of go around and checking in with everybody as they come on, and so we'll go around and we'll do prayer concerns at the end, so we can pray at the end. We'll pray at the beginning too, but you never have too much prayer. But I wanted to welcome everybody. It's 7:06, so get started. Welcome everybody to the Genesis Zoom class. Now I do have this, it's being recorded. So if anybody feels uncomfortable about that, speak now or forever hold your peace. You feel free to turn off your camera. But this is recorded so that if you were to miss a class or something like that, I can, those will be on a private, unlisted Google Drive that I can send, YouTube link that I can send for you to be able to watch it later. And so, if somebody, were to join our church down the road and wanted to get started with the class, but they came in a few weeks late or 10 weeks late, they can go back and watch the other ones if they wanted to. So that's why it's being recorded. So just wanted to make you aware of that. So welcome to Genesis. We are starting at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start, I hear.
right.
And so, but before we get into any of that, let's have a word of prayer. Let's pray. Good and gracious God, thank you so much for our time together on this Zoom meeting to discuss your word, God, to talk about your activity in the creation of the universe. I give you thanks for each one here. I pray that you would continue to pour out your blessings upon each one of them, that you would be present in our conversation tonight, Give us wisdom and discernment as we move verse by verse, but also, God, just surprise us with your Holy Spirit. Help us to learn from one another and ultimately just to grow deeper in our faith and in our relationship with you. We lift all of these things up to you now in the name of Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen.
Well, I think this is mostly a lot of the same folks from last year. I know that Tom Sherrill is joining us, so welcome, Tom. I'm glad. And so, Tom, I think maybe you know most everybody, but I don't know if you met my grandmother. Delitha is joining us also from Michigan.
Hi.
Hi.
And then everybody else.
I don't think I
is
know.
from the
I don't think
church.
I met Jean or Molly, but hi, I'm Tom.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, Jean comes to 9:30 on occasion, and then Molly. I know Molly's been helped at Brown Bag Lunches for a while, and has come to our disciples class, and so yeah. Well, we are going to first. I want to ask and make sure that everybody was able to open the outline. If we were in person, I'd have paper copies to hand you just in case you didn't get it. But did anybody not get the outline? Okay. All right. Good. Any questions on just sort of like the general overview of Genesis? Date range, composition, that kind of thing. We can tell that these were mostly stories, certainly, before the time of Abraham, but even the time of Abraham, these were all stories that were passed down orally for generations, like Adam told his son Seth, and then Seth told his son, and he told his son, and so on and so forth down the generations, these stories that just accumulated until somebody finally wrote them down. And then they were all compiled together into the book that we have now, Genesis. And a lot of the Bible stories were like that. A lot of the stories there in the Bible were spoken first and told over generations until somebody wrote them down. But that is the primary genre of Genesis, is story. And there's a few genealogies thrown in there. So there's a few times where we're going to read, and Adam beget Seth, and Seth beget so-and-so, and so-and-so beget so-and-so. And it's going to be a real big long block of text. And there are, I believe, about 10 of those total. But otherwise, it's pretty much all story, all narrative. And there's a difference between narrative story and history. And history, that's a different genre that's going to come later on in the Bible when we start talking more about Israel's history in like 1st and 2nd Kings and Chronicles and even Samuel. But Genesis is primarily told in story. So I think that's important to keep in mind. So. Are there any comments or questions on Genesis as a whole before we get started?
The two Genesis stories, you probably covered that before.
The two creation stories? Or do one? Yeah, you can tell when we come next week and we talk about Genesis 2, I'll point out, you can tell that it's a retelling. So it goes back and tells again, but it gives more details, specifically about the relationship of God with humanity. And so you can tell that Genesis 2 is a retelling of the creation story, but they both support each other. So they both say something different about the creation, and so they work together. And there's a reason that they're put here together. And so it doesn't. I don't think it takes a whole lot of brain power to work it out. I think it makes sense. You read through it, and it makes sense that when you get to Genesis 2:4, We're going to go back, and we're not going to hear the whole creation story again, but we're going to hear more specifically about how God created humans.
So Moses had scribes that maybe in terms of writing these, the Torah, I mean, is that what we would, in terms of how they did this on parchment and back to the basics?
Yeah, it would have been written on parchment, and over time, because they didn't have copiers back then. Well, they did. They were human people that copied, and so over time, the stories were passed down over the generations, and somebody eventually, maybe Moses, maybe somebody in scribe in Israel, compiled all these stories together into one book. But you're right, Roger, the books weren't like, it's not like this, right? They would have been scrolls. They would have been parchment scrolls. Yeah.
Chris,
Yeah.
in studying, I don't know if I've ever studied, I'm sitting here thinking, studying it this way, in studying the first part, which are stories handed down, and then the second part, as you said, were written information, really, in a book form. Do we think differently about the study? Because one is, a story like you would tell your child, and then the other one is like, if somebody read a story to them, or that was supposed to be nonfiction, I assume. So mentally, do we have a different approach to our study because they're written differently?
Yeah, well, I like to think of it as, so if you read in like First and Second Kings, it becomes really clear that this is written as a history. It says, and these are all the deeds that King Ahab has done, and all the rest of them, aren't they well known? And then it moves on to the next king, and then it reads, but there's still stories interspersed throughout that as well. And these are stories that people are remembering and passing down. So it's not to say they're not true, but there's also a point to telling the stories. So we don't have this is not written as a history textbook like you would get like a American history textbook. So we don't have all of the details of every year that ever happened, but there's a general flow to it. And there's stories that are compiled to give us a picture of what life was like before the patriarchs, and then we start hearing about the lives of the patriarchs later on in Genesis. But there's a point. There's a moral truth there. And so, for instance, in the one that we're reading today, and it is nice and orderly. And so biblical scholars will say, well, this was the priestly writer. This was a priest who was real type A person. The type, right? You know type A people. How many people's are type A people? I'm a little type A. So it's got to be all in order. Whereas you get to Genesis 2, and it's a lot more relational. God created the man and then talked with the man and brought the animals in a parade, and then created the woman and told man, this is what you're supposed to do, and this is what in Genesis 1, it's very day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, so you can see the type A. So there's a human imprint on the story. But remember that humans are created in the image of God. And so one thing that I think is really cool is that you get, and I said in my sermon a few weeks ago, that the more people that you meet, the more people you get to know, the better picture you get of God. And it's the same way here in the Bible, because yes, all of these different stories were written down and conveyed by different people who were in relationship with God. And so they had their own experiences of God. So the more different stories that we read, the better picture we get of God. It's just like the reason we have 4 Gospels of Jesus. Each one tells us something a little bit different, a little bit new about Jesus that we wouldn't get from the other ones, right? So like if we only had John and Mark, we wouldn't know anything about Jesus's birth because those stories are in Matthew and Luke. So I think that, you know, you look for the intent behind the story. What is this particular story telling me about God and about God's relationship with humanity and with the rest of creation? And in Genesis 1, the big T truth that is God created it all. And that was not a common idea back then. You know, we're used to it because we grew up with it, but it was not. This is unique in terms of Near Eastern creation stories. This idea that there's one God outside of creation that acts upon and creates everything, and so everything is a creation of this one God, and that's rather unique, and that's really kind of the main point of this story. So I'll stop preaching.
Okay.
But I'm curious to know, you know, what each of you are excited about for this study, what you hope to get out of it, what you're looking forward to. So I'll just ask that question. You don't have to
I'll-
raise your hand.
I'll speak. I guess I'm the new guy. I'll talk. I mean, my faith, I think, is secure, and I believe, and I have total faith in God, and I grew up in the church, and I serve the church. But I realized, I just felt conviction that I haven't studied lately, and I mean in the last like 5 years. Like, it's been a while, and instead of being fed that, which I think is important. I mean, I think in song or in, you know, the messages from Chris and Mevin, like, I mean, those are all very important, but I feel like I need to dive in and I need to look and study and bounce those ideas off other people. So you guys are it. And I just feel like I've been, you know, and I thought, you know, I'm too busy right now. I can't do this right now. But I feel like in a way that made me more
Determined.
just because I think that I need to challenge it. I need to try to make time. I mean, my life is really hectic right now. But maybe that's when I need to turn to God more, because I feel like sometimes I can fall in that. I don't have time for, I'm raising kids and I've got problems with my parents and I've got a relatively new job, but God has to be a big part of that. And I need to make room for that. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Tom. Anne, you were raising your hand earlier.
I did. I mean, I think everybody in this group kind of knows Genesis. I mean, if you've read the Bible, that's kind of where you start. But for some reason, I wanted to start with Genesis and really kind of get into it a little more. And as I read this for tonight's class, the thing that struck me the most was every now, you know, day 1, day 2, day 3, periodically would be, and God said, this is good. And God said, this is good. And I'm thinking to myself, wouldn't that be wonderful if that's how we felt about the world and creation and those in it and all of our blessings? God said it was good. So that was what I took out of our class for tonight so far.
I think if you take nothing else, that's a wonderful thing to take. And to add to that is that, you know, God pronounced everything good, but pronounced us good before we ever did anything. And so we are according to God, we are inherently good regardless of what we do. But it's not what we do that makes us good. We can still do bad things. But there was a college student on our Next Step trip. She was serving as part of the staff, and we were having a discussion, and she was hung up on this idea of perfection, and she wanted to attain perfection. And she said, when are we going to be perfect again? Because we were perfect before Adam and Eve sinned. And I told her, no, actually we weren't. That God didn't create Adam and Eve perfect. I said, God created Adam and Eve good. He created us good. And so I don't think that the goal is to be perfect. I mean, I think the goal is to be Christ-like. So you could, I
Mm.
mean, you could argue that's some kind of state of perfection. But if we're only ever, if we think we have to be perfect, we're going to be disappointed a lot with ourselves.
Absolutely.
And we don't have to be perfect to be good. So, yeah.
Chris, when I read this, what we just read today,
Hmm.
it reminds me that sometimes we think that we are in charge of the world, that we are in charge of making all these things work and, you know, cutting the trees we want to cut and changing the flow of the water and all this stuff. And it reminds me that God created the house that we live in. And we're not really renters, we're guests. And just like he made the colors of the birds he wanted, he made the kinds of trees he wanted, he made the people in the design that he wanted. And it just brings that back so clearly to me, because I think it's tempting to sometimes feel as though we can do what we want to with his world.
Hey, Chris,
Yes, Roger.
for Tom, I'm going to subvert here to Exodus. Chapter 23, verse 20. Behold, I send an angel before thee to keep thee in the way and to bring thee into the place which I have prepared. That's for Tom.
Thank you, Roger. Well, I'm realizing that we could quickly go past our time. So let's go ahead and dive in. I want to kind of take it a little bit at a time, but we may do like 2 days at a time. But let's just start with just the beginning. So I'm going to read from, I'll read. I'm going to read from my Jewish Bible, Tanakh. It's the JPS translation. It may be a little bit different from what you have, but I kind of like it. Verses 1 and 2. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. That's verses 1 and 2. And then verse 3 says, God said, let there be light, and there was light. So when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and the wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, let there be light, and there was light. And so this is the beginning, but it's a beginning in the sense that it's when time starts.
Right.
But it doesn't talk about, okay, where did God come from? God's already there at the very beginning. So I just wondered what kind of thoughts you had just on those first couple of verses, because they can be kind of deep and difficult to interpret at first.
Go back to John.
In the beginning was the Word. It's funny that you bring that up, Roger, because I think that maybe Carol Estelle in our in-person class brought that up as well. The beginning of John. Yeah.
Where does one go?
You know, I like that it doesn't address where God comes from, because I think when I was young and I first read Genesis, like I got my first Bible when I was confirmed, and so I read it from start to finish, and like, God was before all this. Why doesn't it talk about God, where He came from? And now that I'm, you know, a lot older, I feel like good. I'm glad it doesn't talk about that, because that's something unfathomable. I mean, He was before time, before everything we know, space, earth, you know, sky, land, sea, light. I just like that it was just not even addressed, because it doesn't need to be. It shouldn't be. I mean, how can we quantify that?
Not needed.
Yeah,
What does faith I'm sorry.
I seem to remember a conversation between, I think it was the Pope at one time, and a famous astrophysicist. And the astrophysicist said, we can predict, we can see the background radiation, everything. We can predict, we can go all the way back, and we can see the Big Bang happening and go all the way back to, right when the Big Bang happened. And he said to the Pope, what do you say to that? And the Pope said, that's your realm of expertise. And he said, but go back 1 second before that, and that's mine.
Oh,
I like
Oh.
that.
And as I was reading this again for I don't know how many times, it occurred to me that the formless void is a really weird thing to come up with as an ancient person, describing the way that the world was when God began to create things. It sounds a little bit like a black hole to me. And isn't that what they say? It was a black hole that just all of a sudden, and they can't explain why it exploded, and it just exploded. And then all of a sudden, in like a second, the universe was all over the place. And to me, that right there is when God said, let there be light. So I don't think that science and faith have to butt heads with each other. I think that, God gave us brains and eyes and ears to observe the natural world, to discern more about him and to learn more about him, and to help us, grow our faith in him. So it saddens me when that leads people to move away from God instead of toward him.
But your faith is a daily walk, right?
It is. Yeah. And sometimes it goes this way and sometimes it goes that way. And it's all right because we all know where it ends up.
And you don't walk by yourself.
No, not at all.
But you look back, looking back to the stories
Mm-hmm.
of where he has been and where you have been. There's always tragedies. We have a granddaughter, Megan. Why? But the miracles that our family has been blessed with, it's like mega.
There's a book by, I can't think of his name, but it was the dean of the chapel at Duke University. And the question was, does God laugh?
Is that Stanley Hauerwas, Dita?
No, it's not. And
No? Okay.
I think the book is up the cottage and not here because I have it here in Michigan. But in reading this, maybe it's because I just moved into a new house and I'm trying to move furniture around and have fun doing it. But I sense here the way this is written as though God had a good time designing this earth that he was putting things together on. And I don't know whether fun is an appropriate word, but it was not like it was, at least in my RSV, which could have to do with translation, but it says he did this and that was good. Oh, well, then maybe I'll do that, and maybe I've got lights here and now maybe I have my light for the morning is the sun and then we'll have the moon for the evening. And and as I said, it may be this translation, but to me, it gives him, I always read this as a child as kind of an austere thing to start with. This is God and he's doing all this stuff. And that probably may have had something to do with the way the Sunday school classes were taught in that day too. But I enjoy reading this and I see it a little bit differently now.
I somewhere along the line, I wish I could recall these scriptures, but God was totally happy with his angels. He decided to do this creation, and these angels were not necessarily happy with what God was planning and begins possibly the downfall, the separation of angels. What God had planned for was comfort for relationships, for service. That's about the extent, I think, of what I have to say.
We'll get
Is it
later on we'll get to the Nephilim in chapter 6, and that'll be an interesting discussion. We could probably spend an hour talking about one verse, but I should rephrase. I could probably spend an hour talking about one verse.
Yes, you and I can do that.
Let's go on and do the next couple of days. So would somebody read verses 4 through 8 for us?
I will.
Thanks, Ian.
And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning, the second day.
Thank you, Ann. Did everybody get a chance to look at the ancient Hebrew view of cosmology image that I sent out? I'm going to share it here. So this second day, always used to confuse me a little bit, but I realized in divinity school that this was the way that the ancient Israelites saw the world. So you've heard of Sheol in the Bible, and the foundations of the earth, and the firmament in the sky, and the heavenly storehouses with snow in them, and the floodgates are the gates that hold the waters above the firmament in place, and when the floodgates open, the rains come down. And so this is sort of the way that the ancient Israelites thought that the world was set up. And it makes sense if you think about it. But I thought it was really helpful for me for understanding some of the Psalms and some of the parts of the Bible where they talk about this stuff, and for making sense of some of these things. And it was pointed out in the in-person class that, well, the waters above in the sky, could be, it didn't say it had to be in liquid form. It could be vapor, like the clouds. Mm-hmm. And so, this is the way that the Israelites thought it was. But even though this is the way that they thought the world was set up, the text in the Bible, you can still read it as referring to clouds. And so it's still true. And so I posed this question to the other class, and I ask it not to tear down, but for discussion, so that we can be stronger in our faith and we can talk about it together. Is if it is shown or somehow proven that the biblical text, it does not line up with the way that the world is actually set up, does that make it less true? I think you all know my answer, but I just want to ask the question.
I mean, how many thousands of years? Who's the first person, Copernicus, that decided the world was not a dome over their head, but there was a universe out there? So
Copernicus, you're right, Roger. Yeah. and he got in trouble with the church. And Galileo, who took his teachings, you know, even further, got in big trouble with the church.
They're trying to prove that there was not this dome over their head, but there was galaxies or there was a universe.
Well, on
But I
that
don't.
side- on the side of
ahead.
that graph, where it said that they thought the world was just some flat, I think, on the left side of it, where they said they thought the world was just flat floating on water on pillar and
Yeah.
braced by pillars or something like that. Isn't that what it said, Chris?
Secure the
Yeah,
board.
yeah. The pillars. The earth was water, and then the land was set in it,
Mhm.
and it was supported by foundations, by pillars. The pillars. So when the Bible talks about the pillars of the earth, you know, that's what it's referring to.
Columbus, the sailors were afraid they would fall off the edge of the earth.
Mhm.
I want to read, because I thought this is, by the way, this is the book that I read for sermons and stuff and everything. There's 12 volumes of this, so there's 12 of these, and they cover all of the Bible. But this is the one that I'm using in preparation for this study. And I thought what he says, Terrence, I think is his name, was really, really good. And I wanted to read it for all of you when talking about Genesis and modern science. He says, difficulties arise when it becomes evident that not everything in these chapters can be made congruent with modern knowledge about the world, recognizing that no field of endeavor has arrived at the point of full understanding. If our view of the Bible insists that all information in it of whatever sort must correspond to scientific reality, then we will have to engage in all sorts of exegetical antics to make it work. That's a fancy way of what I like to call mental gymnastics. But if we recognize that those authors did not know everything about the world, such as the source for light, independent of the luminaries, or the age of the world, then we just recognize that and move on. We have to take all the additional knowledge we have gained or will gain about the world and integrate it with our confession about God, the Creator. So I really liked the way that he put that, that we can take the new things that we learn over time. And because have you seen the pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope, those galaxies? Doesn't that make God just seem so much more awe-inspiring that God would create something like that? I mean, the new knowledge that we get, it seems, just gives us an even greater perspective on the magnitude of who God is. So I really liked that explanation that he had.
Everything we're talking about is called faith.
Right.
And sorry.
Right. And I don't think that science can ever prove or disprove ever God. I don't think there will ever be a proof, because if you have a proof, then it's not faith.
That's right. Very
So
true.
every day we experience God in our lives. We have this walk, and we sometimes look back and see it, but we also see it every moment. And the best thing we can do is acknowledge when we see it and give him the praises and glory.
Mm. Yeah, talking about the sky. Well, let's read. So I want to talk about the Milky Way a little bit. So let's read a little bit more. Would somebody read verses 9 through 19? We'll do 2 more days.
I can do that.
Thanks, Norma.
And God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And so it was. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds, and fruit trees of every kind on the earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day.
Thank you, Norma.
Yeah.
So we have now the third and the fourth day.
Right.
And the earth and the heavens have been put in place. But I wanted to ask, has everybody seen, like with your own eyes, the Milky Way at some point in your life? Looked up?
Yeah.
Yes.
I had never seen it before until the summer between my junior and senior year of college. I went to Peru for field school for archaeology, because once upon a time I wanted to be Indiana Jones. And we spent yeah. And we spent 6 weeks up in the Peruvian mountains, up in the Andes, and there was hardly any light pollution, and it was cloudy kind of for the first 3 weeks where we were. It was real foggy. I remember in the second place that we went to, that first night I went out and I looked up and I could see everything. I mean, I could actually see the Milky Way, and I'd never been able to see. I'd only seen it in pictures, and it just was so, it makes you feel about that big. But it also felt like I had this intimate connection with God at the same time. And I don't know if that was your experience of seeing it too, but it just, Roger, you're talking about seeing God in nature and connecting with God and through creation and in the day-to-day. And for me, it's just amazing how that feeling of insignificance can make you feel connected to everything at the same time.
Yeah. Absolutely. But this reassurance is, being able to look back and again to experience God, those God moments. Surreal.
Mm-hmm. What other thoughts about, these verses, what we've read so far? Or anything that sticks out to you?
I think about the waters being separated from the earth. I look at these in Arizona, all these massive structures, all these formations, and I don't think if you if you go along with the flood, I don't think the flood necessarily created these. I think these go back to the creation of the earth, these massive stone structures that intense, incredible force, this water and earth separating, God's hand at work as an artist.
Not just Arizona.
Everywhere.
No, not just Arizona.
Yeah. Well, you know that it that reminds me that you know, here in verse 9, you know, God speaks, but then the waters also participate in the creation by obeying God's word and in gathering like God wanted them to. And so, you know, you start to see in this account throughout that God's creating is inviting. You know, it's not just forcing. God didn't just take his hands and go to the waters. God said, let the waters be gathered together. And the waters obeyed his command and did the gathering and participated in the creation. And so you're talking about the, you know, the formations and how the waters, you know, made those. That, I mean, God made it by inviting the waters to do their thing. And God continues to invite all sorts of things into participating in creation, including us. And God saw that it was good. There it is, Anne.
Mhm.
Yeah. Somebody had asked, you know, if God waited until day 4 to create the sun and the moon and the stars, then why was there light on day 1? Well, you know, I guess the technical scholarly answer is that apparently the Israelites believed that light had another source other than the sun, because, you know, when it was cloudy, it was still light out. When the sun hadn't come up yet, there was light. But to me, you know, this whole thing seems like it's ordering. So God separates the light from the darkness, and then God separates the waters from the land. And then here in day 4, he sort of separates the light out into sun and moon and stars and creates them to gives them roles to govern the time of the seasons and the days. So it's that there was light, but then God separated it into sun and moon and stars. And so you can kind of think of, you know, the stardust, you know, out in space being brought together. And I grew up on Magic School Bus. I don't know if anybody else has ever seen Magic School Bus, but
They're great.
there's this one episode where they go to and they make a star in the bus, and the bus goes and there's a supernova, and then there's all of this, you know, dust and gas and everything in the bus. There's these 2 giant hands come out of the bus and gather it all, sweep it up with a dustpan and gather it all together, and then just squeeze it really hard until the star is born and there's light. And that's the image I get when I think of God creating the sun. You know, squeezing the dust really hard until the fusion reaction takes place and it starts going. And so I think it's more of a separating into light bodies than, well, there was some random light and then there was the sun. It's more God separated the light into these heavenly bodies to order the days and the time. And you see the earth also participates in creation in verse 12. It says the earth brought forth vegetation because God asked it to. So
My plants, the deer don't eat them. They may be getting them right now, is the problem.
Would somebody, would somebody read verses 20 through 25?
I'll do that,
Well-
Chris.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You
All
go.
right. 20 through 25.
Yeah.
All right, let me get my finger there. Okay. And God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the firmament of the heavens. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the cattle according to their kinds, and everything that creeps upon the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good.
Thank you.
I think of your sister when I read that. I don't think she would like some of that part in there about the creeping things.
Oh, the creeping thing.
Right.
And he created cicadas.
And he created the cicadas. But
Yes.
according to one of my fellow scouts way back in the day in Boy Scouting, mosquitoes are not the creation of God. They were created by the devil, and therefore it's okay to kill them.
That's cute.
Birds love mosquitoes. 75% of their protein.
Well, there's lots of explanations for lots of weird things in nature. Or weird explanations for things in nature. I get my modifier in the right place.
He was joking. He said, I love all God's creatures, but mosquitoes were created by the devil, so I hate them. Smack one.
So then what's going to keep the snakes alive? Or whoever eats mosquitoes? Birds, bats.
Hummingbirds eat mosquitoes.
I don't know.
Yeah, do I've been searching for it, but hummingbirds in flight eating mosquitoes. Absolutely.
Let's go online and find out.
75% of the protein, mosquitoes. 25% is that sugar stuck right out there. Don't quote that from Roger.
Roger, I heard somewhere that 75% of all statistics are made up.
You're probably right.
We heard that on National Geographic.
Yeah, we've let them hear, but you've only have what you see.
But you're right. It's all interconnected. Everything is all interconnected in our ecosystem works. The way that God set everything up, and that's another place where I think science can come in and illuminate. Or the more that we learn about how all of the different plants and animals and ecosystems are dependent upon each other and work together, and the intricate webs of interactions, I just think the more amazing it all is that God set this all up to work this way.
Totally.
I'm just trying to figure out why my apple trees are affected by these Mediterranean bugs. Form these worms. Anyway, something loves them out there somewhere.
The deer.
But I think, it shows that there is a delicate balance to what he designed, in that, for example, up here in Michigan, we had all that high water, for a couple of years, and that why or what, if that was man-made or if it was part of the plan, I don't know. But those things can get easily out of balance and then they become destructive. Whatever it
Totally.
is.
Truly scary.
Chris, from my standpoint, when God put all of these different animals and insects, whatever, on this earth, do you think that he had in mind the food chain?
Mhm.
No, because as we'll read a little bit pretty soon, in the very beginning of creation, everything's supposed to be vegetarian.
Okay,
But I think it. I mean, God is omniscient, right? So God could see ahead, and I'm sure had that all planned out. Just in case one of his creations was going to go off and eat some fruit that they weren't supposed to.
yeah. I'm just saying, the food chain really with the insects and animals, we could still be as a human, a vegetarian,
People
but
weren't in the-
really still have a food chain that's out there among these various animals that he put
civilization.
on land or in the sea.
Man, so sir.
No, siree.
Yeah, I didn't get some of that, but
Is it my
I think that I'm sure that God had a plan B, so to speak. I mean, I think that, and the other thing is that God, we see God continuing to invite the members of creation into creation, and so I think that when God finished creation, it wasn't static, right? It's not. God didn't build a diorama, right? God designed a universe, and so it continues to create anew and evolve and become more like the way that God set it up to continue to build upon itself and to continue to become more perfect over time. And then things get out of balance, but there's a line that I really like from Jurassic Park, life finds a way. Remember that line? And I think that God built that in. So whether food chain was originally intended by God, I don't think it was originally intended by God, because we have here later on Genesis 1:30, it says that everything is supposed to eat plants. But I think that God designed it in such a way that when sin entered into the world because of Adam and Eve, it didn't all fall apart. It didn't just all fall apart. God designed this creation to be in relationship with him and to be in relationship with each other, and sin came in and distorted that, but it didn't destroy it, if that makes sense.
Right.
Well, let's get to the part that I think we all want to talk about, and talk about the creation of humanity. So would somebody read verses 26 through, go on to the end of the chapter, 31, verses 26 through 31?
I'll read it.
Thanks, Jane.
And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image, and in the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day.
Thank you, Jane.
Welcome.
Honey.
The sixth day ends with the creation of humankind.
Human. Mhm.
So there's a lot in here, and there's a lot about the image of God, and what does it mean to have dominion, and us being vegetarians, which we kind of already talked about. And so I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about all of that, because especially with regards to the image of God, somebody always says something that I hadn't thought about before. So
Mhm.
what does that mean to you, that we're created in God's image?
Well, I want to think first that it means love, because I
Mm.
think that was what all this came to be about, because he saw a realization of the creation as it happened, that ultimately that was love from him as it all started, and it continues today. So that's where it is with me. And I trust that that's where his being is all the time, every day we live.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Somebody else?
love has to excel. I mean, his very being is reaching out. If love is not the number one
Element.
yeah, if that's not the number one in all, what else is there?
When you think of the magnificence of creation, that right there has to say that love makes the world go round. Totally.
Well, God didn't have to make any of it.
Never.
God didn't have to create any of it. God chose to create it, and chose to create it the way that he created it, and chose to make it good, and chose to involve us in it. We could have just been another run-of-the-mill creation, but God said, I want to make a creature that I can have an intimate relationship with, and that I can entrust my creation, all of my creation, over to. And that's a huge thing.
It will perpetuate his main focus and thought and desire. And we fall short, believe me, everyone falls short, but there's no reason why we can't the next minute or so get it back on track. And that's always our hope if we get off that track.
Backing up, being God all-knowing, his plan is love. I mean, for evil to become a part of it.
Not on his part.
That's a divide that, in terms of, I mean, of course he knew that may happen, but did he know, or did he plan for the angels to take pride in their life and to begin this divide? I mean, that was not his plan, but he's all knowing.
Yeah, on God's omniscience, I just want to share with you. I learned so much about God from my kids. I'm one day Owen he got a piece of paper and some crayons and he said, I'm going to draw a picture for God. And I said, oh, that's nice. I'm going to draw a picture for God. And then he said, his face kind of fell a little bit. And he said, but God knows everything, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, so won't she already know? And we refer to God, he or she, so he's kind of picked up on certain things. But he said, won't she already know what I've drawn before I draw it? And I looked at him, I said, you know what, Owen, God can do anything. And so I bet that if God wanted to be surprised by your picture, God could choose to be surprised, could choose to look away while you draw it and be surprised by your picture. And
Good.
that was something I never even considered before, but I think, that's something that I learned from Owen.
What a
You
great
know,
answer.
Could God not choose to be surprised by us sometime?
Well, I'm sure you could.
Yeah.
I hope Owen drew the picture.
He did. He was satisfied with that answer and he just started drawing. So don't ask me where that picture ended up. It's God only knows.
That's all that's important here, except that he learned something.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah.
Great story, Chris.
I think, looking at that part we just read, if I can make a comment, we view this from having read the whole book and knowing that God sends Jesus and so forth, but they don't know that here.
No.
And so yet to me, what's interesting is that they did this section of noting the male and female, and they saw how things multiplied, and they wanted things. I get the feel they wanted things to multiply. They wanted, the seeds from the flowers to be replanted and to continue on. And I just find this interesting that he could have done this and they could have seen it as, well, this is really nice, but it's the end right here, not to think of it that way. But there, I think, is really a beautiful idea that in their story they were telling, they were anticipating that this would continue whether they were there or not. That's what I think.
And here we are today.
Here we are today. I wanted to also point out that, when you see God said, let us make humankind in our image, a lot of people will say, well, he's talking to the heavenly council of angels and everything. And as a Christian, it's really hard for me not to read Trinitarian ideas into that, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Even this was originally a Jewish text. So, but something I find interesting is that the Hebrew word for God, and some of you may remember this from a couple of years ago when we did a theology course, the Hebrew word for God, Elohim, is plural. Grammatically, it's plural.
About
And
that.
so, you may have heard Adonai Elohim. Well, that's the Lord thy God. And Adonai is what they say for Lord. And Elohim means God. But El is the singular, El. So you may have heard El Shaddai, right? Almighty God. Well, El is the singular form, but Elohim is plural. But throughout this whole story, whenever you read God, the Hebrew word is Elohim. It's plural. And so the pronouns have to match that. So when God says, let us make humankind, the Hebrew pronouns match the plural God. I think it's so cool that in Hebrew, the word for God is plural. And when it says, let us make humankind in our image, to me, that means that at least one part of the image of God that's in us is that we're not supposed to be alone. We're not supposed to be alone. We are created to be in community with each other. And that is just, next week we'll get here, but that's further confirmed by the following story of Adam and Eve, where God says it is not good that the man should be alone. So nothing against people who like to be alone, but God designed us to be in community with each other. So
Chris, do you have any idea how the Jewish people would define the pluralistic form of that name? I'd like to know how they would define that.
yeah, I don't know why. I don't know the explanation behind why they use the plural.
I agree. I know though.
But well, El was the god of the Canaanites. It was the like El was for the Canaanites who Zeus was for the Greeks, the head of the pantheon.
Okay.
And so, when Israelites sort of adopted that word as a general word for God. And so maybe it was to differentiate it from the god El of the Canaanites that they made it plural, Elohim, to refer to just the one monotheistic God. I don't know the reason. Don't quote me on that, because I don't know that that's the reason behind it. I could again go back and ask my Hebrew professor. He might have some more understandings, but I just think it's cool that the word is plural, and as somebody who believes in the Trinity, I think that's cool. So
that would be a good way to look at it, I think. That's a Jewish term.
I also like the plural, because to me that sounds bigger and broader, and God is nothing but big and broad, and to make it singular is in a way making her small, at least in my thinking. So I like it. It's big. Plural is big to me. So
I like that.
Is Elohim Jewish? Is that a Jewish word or a
Should I?
Hebrew?
a Hebrew word, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, the I am on the end is designates plural. So
Thank you.
im is like for us, we put an S on the end of a word. In Hebrew, they put the I am on the end of the word, make it plural.
Oh,
But I should say, I think that's the masculine plural. So it's been forever since I took Hebrew, but I still have the Bible. I still have the.
Oh, wow. Good for
You read it backwards.
Yeah, you
Okay, so
Well, I can't read it anymore.
Chris?
Okay.
why do they read backwards? Why?
See that
That's-
stack of
that's
books
the way it
over
was.
there?
Uh-huh.
Those are for you.
Those are
Old
for me.
Greek, Old Hebrew. They're gonna have to practice up.
But see, I also have my handy dandy Hebrew dictionary, because I can only look up one word at a time and look it up in the dictionary, because I can't read it anymore like I used to
Ooh,
in seminary.
yeah.
I brought those with me in case somebody had a question on one word. So, but it's not going to give me the etymology of Elohim. It would just be if we wanted to know what a word means. So it's not going to tell me
That's
why.
interesting explanation. I forgot. I used to know that.
And speaking of words in Hebrew, I think we have to talk about this word dominion, because it's been used over the years to justify doing whatever we want to the world, when in reality the word is more more describes dominion over the creation in the same way that God has dominion over creation and over us. And God's dominion is not a selfish dominion. If that makes sense. It's not, God doesn't just use us for God's own benefit. God rules over us in a way that promotes our best interests. And so I think that that is really kind of the meaning here, that God just wants us to care for, to rule over his creation in a way that brings out the best possible. I'll read it the way that the commentary put it much better than I. That it involves development of the created order, or of bringing the world along to its fullest possible creational potential. So I think there, it may take a while for that understanding to take root, and for us to sort of reverse course on how we treat the world. But I think the original intent was that we don't use it just for us, that we take care of it and we try to help it to become more created. I don't know. That makes sense.
As in guardians of the world?
Yeah. Later on in chapter 2, when God tells Adam, or I'm sorry, it tells the man, commanded him to till it and to keep it, the garden. And that word to keep is also the word for guard or protect. And then the word for till is also the word for serve.
Serve.
So we're supposed to protect and serve
Mm-hmm.
the garden, the world,
Mm-hmm.
house.
Chris, I have one question. We here as Christians are talking about the creation of life, really. How about other religions, whether and some of them are much larger, Hindu or Islamic or probably even Buddhist? Do they study the same thing about how this earth was created, or the world?
I wish that I could answer that with confidence. I own a Quran. I've been meaning to read it just for the purposes of understanding it, understanding the other side. But I don't recall from what I've read so far any discussion. I know that the Islamic faith also traces themselves back to Abraham. And so, possibly could regard the stories prior to that as scriptural. But I don't know. I can't answer that. Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism. So Buddhism came off of Hinduism the same way that Christianity, not the same way, but it's an offshoot of Hinduism, just like Christianity is an offshoot of Judaism, and they follow the way of the Buddha. Hinduism has a creation story. I could not tell you what that is without, I should probably go and read the Bodhisattva, but I haven't yet. So I apologize for my lack of knowledge in that area. But there's tons of other religions and faiths also out there that have creation stories. And there were a lot around Israel at the time that had creation stories. So one of them that gets compared to this is the Enuma Elish. It's a Babylonian creation myth. And in that creation myth, there is there's a flood, and then and now I could be conflating my Canaanite and my Babylonian creation myths, but there's a god that Baal that fights with the sea monster Tiamat and wins and splits open Tiamat, and out of Tiamat the whole world is created. So it's a very different creation myth. And a lot of creation myths around the world are similar. It involves gods fighting and then the world is born.
Okay.
But it's very different in the Bible. It's, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth and say it's 100% unique, but it's certainly very unique.
No doubt.
Okay.
I could say it's completely unique, and then one of you finds a creation story from some podunk religion that is very similar and brings it to me, and so I'm not gonna say, you know, but it is very, very revolutionary for sure in that particular area. I can say that with confidence, in that particular area of the world. Nothing else like it.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting.
I also always like to point out to people that the first thing that God said to humans, well, first God blessed us. It says God blessed them. The first thing that God said to humans is be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply.
So there you have it right there. There's a time and a place, but God does want us to do it, and it is good. So. And then the fill the earth, I kind of feel like there could be some discussion as to whether we've accomplished that at this point, because we're all kind of all over the earth. And now we're looking to Mars almost. So I don't know.
Don't want to go. But
Well, let's finish out with the final day, day 7. Somebody read chapter 2, verses 1 through 3.
you read, Roger? Sure.
I'll read it.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done.
Thank you, Tom. Does anybody take a Sabbath? Intentionally take a Sabbath day? I'm not judging you if you don't. I try, but it doesn't always work out.
No.
But does
I-
anybody try to take a Sabbath day? No.
Well,
As a child, I did more of that.
Retired.
I try to make it take a Sabbath, not for rest, but to make it set apart. So make it different than the other 6. I mean,
Yeah.
in today's society, we can't, or we just don't totally rest, and life does move. But I try to make my Sunday that with church and family. We usually try to go out for brunch, the 4 of us, and we try to do things at home. But it doesn't always work. You might still do other things that you would do any other day. But I think starting your day with church and doing something as a family, that starts the day kind of that way. And maybe we take a rest and take a nap, but it's not a totally day of rest, but different, set apart.
But you look at how the world has changed. When I was a child growing
Right.
up, none of the stores were open on
New
Sunday.
laws.
Nothing
Yeah.
was open, because everything closed down, because that was the day that you spent with your family. My mom did no laundry. We did no mowing the yard.
Right.
It was a day, it was actually a day of rest. So
Blue
we
days,
visited, although we did visit, but
And now you're made to feel almost ashamed if you do nothing for a day. If you don't do anything productive for a day.
yeah.
But
Chris.
God took a
Chris,
whole
When
day.
you're retired, I think when you retire, you probably had more days like that.
Tell me all about it, Sam.
Yeah,
More Sabbath days.
more Sabbath days.
More Sabbath days.
Well, Sundays also used to be a day of visiting with family.
Mhm.
Yes.
Right.
You would go specifically, or you'd eat, like, I know there's a family where the grandmother, don't get any ideas, Chris. The grandmother always cooked Sunday meal, and all the kids went to her house to eat together. But so that was a form of something special for Sunday.
Mhm.
It may not have been productive as work, but it was productive as memories and belonging and bringing together and bonding.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I think
We call it Family Day.
They were the good old
True.
days. That's what they were.
Right.
It's before television.
Mhm.
You sat and visited and then watched the football game.
mhm.
And before texting.
Right.
I think certainly, I think that the world could all learn a little bit from God in these verses. If God can take a day off, you can too.
Good point.
Good idea.
Right.
Well, the
And
Jewish, the
I
Jewish
try to make
people were that-
my, sorry, Jane.
well, knowing a lot of people in Bexley and knowing the synagogues are there, the Jewish people certainly live this today.
Yes,
That's part of life. And I know some of them, and that's very, very meaningful, without a doubt.
They don't schedule any kind of car repairs.
Yeah, and they also don't use vehicles, many of them. I think the more strict
Right.
family groups, they walk to the synagogue, no matter the weather, and things like that are just part of their heart for God.
Well, I try to take my Sabbath on Mondays. Doesn't always work out.
I'm sure.
But so if you send me an email on a Monday and I don't get back to you till Tuesday, I promise I'm not trying to be rude. It's just I'm trying to save and wait to do work until Tuesday. If you end up in the hospital and need me there on Monday at 3 p.m., I will be there. But if it's something that can wait, then I'll generally wait until Tuesday. So there's something I wanted to share with all of you, but I wanted to save it until the end because I'm going to turn off the recording right now. So if you're watching this later, thank you for coming by, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to turn off the recording right now.